Good evening and welcome to the final showdown. There are just 10 days to go before Australia chooses its next leader. This is your chance to witness what might well be the most crucial 1 hour in the political lives of these contenders. It's the final time for you to see the candidates for the Prime Ministership face to face. The final time you'll see them in the same room together until Australia votes and decides which one will lead us into the future. Tonight, the questions you want answered. Gentlemen, we know you're not friends, but can we be friendly tonight? Can we agree that we want to hear your policy and we want you to engage but not disrupt each other? Can we get an agreement? Thank you very much. Terrific. This is how the debate will work. Each leader will make a 2-minute opening address. They'll see a timer on their camera and you'll see a clock for the final 30 seconds. We won't cut the mics, but the timings are there for each leader to get a fair chance to get their points across. The same thing when we ask our key questions. 2 will come from the West Australian political editor, Lani Scarr. While every seat counts, 6 in WA could decide who wins. But there are marginal seats across the country and we have selected 25 undecided voters watching on live in every state of Australia and the Northern Territory. They'll deliver their verdict after this decisive debate. To keep track of the leaders' pitches and promises live online, head to 7news.com.au and thewest.com.au. A coin toss was held a short time ago. Anthony Albanese won and chose to go second. So, let's begin the opening statements. Scott Morrison, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mark, and good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. As we all know, the last few years have been very tough for Australians, and I've never been more proud of my fellow Australians. As a government, we've sought to back in Australians every step of the way through the most difficult time we've seen since the Second World War. Of course, we haven't got everything right, but we've stood there with Australians, and right now, Australia is one of the most successful economies to come out of this pandemic amongst the advanced economies of the world. We know that a strong economy, we've learned again, is just so important to everything that we hope to achieve as a nation. And it will be into the future with the challenges and the uncertainties we face. A strong economy provides that economic shield for jobs, for incomes, for the businesses you run, to keep taxes low and to put downward pressure on the global forces that are pushing up interest rates and cost of living, to guarantee those essential services you rely on, that we've been able to double funding for hospitals and schools and mental health and deal with the challenges of aged care and disabilities and continue to support Medicare, to build the roads, the safer roads and the infrastructure Australia needs to grow, and to fund our defence forces, security services and intelligence services that keep Australians safe. But most of all, it means that you can achieve your aspirations for you and your family. In a stronger economy, you have more opportunity to do that. In a weaker economy, it's harder, and you don't want to risk a weaker economy. We've got big challenges and uncertainties still to face, and Australians have done so well up until now, and we don't want to risk everything that's been put in to ensure we're at this point to seize those opportunities for the future. That's why this election is all about who can manage that economy best, who can manage money, who understands the economy best to ensure that we can have a strong economy for a stronger future for Australia.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. Mr Albanese, your 2-minute opening statement.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. I believe that good government can change people's lives for the better. I believe that good government can help people achieve their dreams and aspirations for a better future for themselves, their families, and in particular the generations to come. I know it because I've lived it. That's my story. Now I want to build a better future and use the power of government to assist Australians as the leader of this country. I want a better future where we deal with the cost of living crisis, where everything is going up except for people's wages. A better future where people, if they need to see a doctor, can see one, where we strengthen Medicare and we make medicines cheaper. A better future where childcare is more affordable, women can more participate in the economy, and we can build productivity at the same time. A better future where dealing with climate change means taking up the opportunity to grow the economy with renewables and new industries, training people for those jobs with fee-free TAFE and additional university places. and a better future where we deal with the aged care crisis. Older Australians deserve to live in dignity and with respect in their later years. But it's also important how they get there. I want us to bring together big business and unions, to bring together small business and their employees, to bring together the Commonwealth, states and territories to work on our common interest. Australians have conflict fatigue. They want solutions, not arguments. And that's what I want to deliver in delivering a better future when where no one is held back and no one is left behind.
Mr Albanese, thank you. We'll give each leader 1 minute uninterrupted to answer our questions tonight. Then we'll have time to rebut and debate. Our opening question tonight is on wages. It is the defining issue of the final days of this campaign. Mr Albanese, you said you'd absolutely support a 5.1% pay rise to match inflation, a pay rise that is to the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Today, that's not so clear though. What is your promise?
It is very clear. Well, the Fair Work Commission set wages, but the idea that $1, Scott just spoke about the strength of the economy that he says is there. The idea that those heroes of the pandemic, those low-wage workers, people on the minimum wage, are cleaners. They're people working in the care sector. They're people who work in retail. They're people who help get us through the pandemic. They deserve more than our thanks. They don't deserve a real wage cut. Now, the Fair Work Commission makes a decision independent of government. But what I've said is if they made a decision that there shouldn't be a real wage cut, would I welcome it? Absolutely. Because people are doing it really tough out there. The cost of everything is going up. The cost of food and vegetables and meat, the essentials in life. The idea that after everything we've been through in the pandemic, minimum wage workers would get a real wage cut is something that I don't support.
All right. Mr Morrison, you say a pay rise matching inflation will cripple the economy?
Now, what I say is I support wages obviously going up and welcome the fact that Reserve Bank Governor is saying that those wages are now going up. And the minimum wage, well, it's increased by 7% in real terms over the course of our government. In fact, in 7 of the last 8 years, the minimum wage increase has been higher than inflation. Under the previous Labor government, 3 out of the 6 years they were in government, real wages actually fell for minimum wage earners. And it's not just the minimum wage which is affected by the wage decision of the Fair Work Australia. It's about 2% who are on the minimum wage, but another 23% of the Australian workforce is impacted by that decision through some 120 awards. And you know, small business, in the submission that the government made to the Fair Work Commission, we don't tell them what to do, but we inform them about what's going on in the economy. And small businesses are doing it incredibly tough. They're the ones who employ people. And we want to ensure that they can keep employing people. And by having a sensible approach to wages policy, they can employ people and pay them better wages.
All right, Mr Albanese, you said you would welcome a pay rise in line with inflation if that's what the Fair Work Commission decided. What would you advocate for, though?
We're advocating publicly that people not get left behind. That's what we've been doing.
Is there a number, though? Is it inflation?
No.
Is it underlying inflation plus productivity? What is it?
What we have said throughout this campaign is that we don't want people to be left behind, that people are doing it tough, and that those people who are on minimum wages, if the increase is less than the inflation rate, then what that means is they'll be getting a real wage cut. And they deserve better than that. The Fair Work Commission does make those decisions independently, but we've made that very clear.
Yeah, OK, very clear. Can we make this very clear? Yesterday you were asked, would you support 5.1%, which is at the moment the rate of inflation? And you said absolutely.
That's right, and if the Fair Work Commission makes that decision, we would absolutely welcome it. Because real workers out there are doing it tough, and those people on the minimum wage, it's not like they're making decisions based upon what holiday they'll have. What they're making decisions on is whether they'll buy a steak or just have to stick to mincemeat for their families. There are real pressures out there on people, and we need to recognise that people have gone backwards. Real wages went backwards in the last 12 months. But for people on the minimum wage, they're doing it really tough right now.
Mr Morrison, what sort of pay rise do workers deserve?
The Fair Work Commission is the right place to do that. And the reason that is because the economy needs stability and it needs certainty, particularly with the many things that are pressuring down on the economy today. I'd welcome pay rises, obviously, for all workers, not just those on the minimum wages. But we need to have an economy that's strong into the future. And if you have wages that rise at 5.1%, which is exactly what Mr Albanese said yesterday, that means that can feed into inflation, which pushes up interest rates and pushes up the cost of living even more. We can't have a situation where someone may get a wage rise, but then gets it all taken back in higher interest rates and higher costs of living. That's why we think the most sensible way is to look at all of the evidence, not to just run off at the mouth and just come up with things on the run, but to consider these sorts of economic questions very carefully. You've got to understand how the economy works. And if you just say 5.1% and try to jawbone the Fair Work Commission, then that puts Australia's economy at great risk, and we can't afford that sort of lack of understanding about how our economy works.
All right, Prime Minister. So, Mr Albanese, the Prime Minister makes the point, if wages go up in line with inflation or greater, you put in additional pressure on interest rates and inflation and prices and mortgages.
Now, what the Reserve Bank says and what economists say is that in order to have non-inflationary wage increases, they shouldn't be more than inflation plus productivity.
Underlying inflation.
Inflation plus productivity.
Not headline inflation. Not 5.1, 3.5.
And what we're talking about here, is people on minimum wages. It's $20.33 an hour. What we're talking about here, if the Fair Work Commission grant a 5% increase, that's 2 cups of coffee a day. And the idea that 2 cups of coffee a day is something that would damage the economy is, I believe, just not the case.
Yeah.
We need to look after people who are vulnerable. We need to do more than say, thanks very much for everything you did in the pandemic, but now we're going to cut your wages.
Very quickly, Prime Minister, Mr Albanese is saying $1 an hour additional for people on $20 an hour. It seems pretty reasonable.
Well, if Mr Albanese thinks small businesses around the country can have a 5% increase in their wages bill on top of all the other things they're facing and see their ability to come through, then people won't be worrying about what their wages are. They'll be worrying about whether they have a job. You know, you just can't be loose with the economy with things like this. You've got to be understanding all the moving parts, and there are more moving parts in our economy than ever before with the pressures on global pressures for rising interest rates and inflation. And a 5.1% increase, which the Leader of the Opposition has advocated. He may be trying to walk it back now. That would push up inflation and it would push up interest rates.
All right, let's move on to the question.
Can I just make one further point?
Quickly.
That Scott can respond to, perhaps. You have failed on a number of occasions that we've asked in the Parliament and again in a previous debate to say that every worker should get even the minimum wage. Is that still your position?
No, my position is that employees should get the minimum wage. That's exactly the case.
You've said before that it's complicated.
Employees.
You've refused to back it in.
I'm talking about employees. You're talking about people who choose to be in small business. And
no,
I'll tell you what, small business...
I'm talking about workers.
People who run small businesses, Anthony, they don't get guaranteed anything. They risk their businesses and their own incomes in their houses every single day, and they need the support to help employ Australians.
All right, let's get back to some structure, gentlemen. The cost of living has meant the great Australian dream is becoming more out of reach, and it just got a lot harder with interest rates on the rise. Who or what is responsible, and can either of you guarantee your economic plan will bring rates back under control, Mr Morrison?
Well, the best way to keep downward pressure on rising interest rates, and we know that interest rates have risen 25 basis points. Now, they've gone up 125 basis points in New Zealand. They've gone up 75 in the UK, 90 in the UK, 75 in the United States and Canada. And so we're seeing this all around the world, and Australia has been performing better. But to keep downward pressure on interest rates, you've got to keep downward pressure on inflation as well. And that's why being able to manage money means we've been able to secure our AAA credit rating, one of only 9 countries in the world to do so. And we've done that through the middle of a pandemic where the economic impacts have been 30 times worse than what occurred in the global financial crisis just over a decade ago. And we've got employment outcomes that are 50% better. That's what a good economic plan looks like. That's what good economic management looks like. And in a strong economy, you can be more confident about your ability. Now, we know that Australians through the pandemic have been taking good decisions. They've switched to fixed interest rates. They've got ahead of their mortgage. As a government, we've been showing the same responsibility.
OK, Mr Albanese, how will you put downward pressure on interest rates?
Well, the first thing to say is that Australia achieved the AAA credit rating under the government that I was a part of and a senior minister on, and we've kept it since, and that's a good thing. The way that you can grow the economy without putting upward pressure on inflation and interest rates, the key is productivity. And that's why we've prioritised productivity-boosting measures as part of our economic plan, whether it's childcare that will boost workforce participation and boost productivity in the workplace, whether it be our infrastructure investments where we'll prioritise projects that boost the economy rather than pork barrelling, including supporting the national broadband network, whether it be making more things here in Australia, or our plan on energy and climate change. It's about seizing the opportunity for investing in renewable energy. Our plan will see $52 billion of investment that will reduce power prices for businesses and also for households.
Mr Morrison, Mr Albanese, you just made the point about productivity. Fairly insipid in the recent years, around 1%, just below, just above. Why has it been so low? And what can you do to increase productivity in the next 3 years?
The most important things we can do to boost productivity is invest in the skills of Australians. This year, about $7.8 billion has been invested in giving young Australians and people all throughout the workforce, giving them better skills to make sure they can make an even stronger contribution in their workplace. We've also invested almost $3.5 billion in our digital strategy, which is helping small businesses and businesses right across the economy be able to upgrade their businesses and do more online and make them part of the new economy into the future. We've also invested heavily in issues like cybersecurity, which will be critical to businesses into the future. Another important part of what we're doing has been investing in that infrastructure. Western Sydney Airport, under our government, is a reality. Under Labor, it was just a promise that never happened. Under our government, we're building that infrastructure, $120 billion worth, whether it's the Melbourne Airport Rail, the Western Sydney Airport here in Sydney, the Inland Rail, which is going to carry the freight that Australia needs to get things out of this country, into port and into those markets we're expanding.
Mr Albanese, will that increase productivity?
Well, what we're dealing with here is some comeback from the massive cuts that occurred in skills and in infrastructure under this government. We've seen infrastructure prioritised based upon colour-coded spreadsheets, not based upon productivity. We've seen Infrastructure Australia sidelined. We, of course, know that productivity went backwards in consecutive quarters before the pandemic, and at that time the government doubled the deficit before the pandemic. And we will, if we're successful in the election, inherit $1 trillion of debt. There's nothing productive about doubling the debt before the pandemic that occurred. We'll prioritise skills, infrastructure, good energy policy, good childcare policy and women's workforce participation in order to make sure we put that downward pressure on inflation and interest rates.
OK, let's bring it back for our viewers. What they're hearing you say regularly is everything's going up except your wages. Families are cash poor, they're stretched on mortgages. What can you do to increase the cash position of families?
Well, right now, we've had a $100 billion turnaround in the budget in the last 12 months. And we turned that budget round by the time we hit the pandemic. Mr Albanese talks about those years before the pandemic. It took us 6 years to clean up the fiscal mess from the previous government. We got the budget back into balance, and then we put in place the single biggest economic intervention in the form of JobKeeper, which I now can say saved more than 800,000 jobs. Now we're doing it again. because as Australia comes out of this pandemic, we didn't want them to get hit down by the rising costs of living caused by the war in Europe and the issues in China and the floods that we've seen pushing up fruit and vegetable prices. So we cut fuel tax in half, $250 to pensioners and others on fixed incomes from the government, and increased tax relief from the 1st of July, where families up to $126,000 a year will get an extra $420 that they'll keep of money they earn. But the tax cuts we provided continue into the future, because they should keep more of what they earn, and we've always delivered lower taxes.
All right, Prime Minister, thank you. You are smashing out those talking points. There's something. Mr Albanese, what are you going to do to ensure that families can make ends meet? That's the basic requirement.
Well, the truth is that people are just doing it really tough out there. Our measures on childcare, for example, will make it... Take away the incentive. How crazy is it? In 2022, that some women, if they want to work a 4th or a 5th day, it costs their family money. Everyone knows out there that when your youngest child goes into kindergarten, all of a sudden families are better off. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. It's a disincentive to work and to participate in the workforce that really penalises families for having children. We need to do much better. Our energy policy will reduce electricity prices by $275 for households by 2025. We'll have cheaper medicines, lowering the cost to $30. These are all practical steps that we will make. But as for the Prime Minister's position, the fact is the debt had doubled before the pandemic, and the other fact is he speaks about the one-off payments. Yes, they're happening. We supported them because we know people are struggling. And now during an election campaign, he says that giving the lowest paid workers $1 extra an hour is somehow disastrous.
We've had that,
and that contradiction between the two positions is, I think, really stark.
Can I get a commitment from both of you? We've had that debate. Can I get a commitment from both of you that families won't have to pay to see sport on their televisions?
Well, we've both got a review after the election, but Mark,
no.
I know we have been...
A review?
Yeah,
That's not a commitment.
We're both committed to a review, but Mark, can I...
Committed to a review?
Can I come back to the point we're just making? It's important. And that is, Mr Albanese is making a lot of promises. He talks about childcare. That costs $63 billion over 10 years. We hear him talk about a lot of things he's going to do.
It's not right.
But what we haven't heard is how he's going to pay for them. During this election campaign, he has not submitted one policy for costing, not one. And all of these things sound good, but you've got to be able to pay for them, and the only way you can pay for them is with a strong economy.
That's not right.
Let's give you a chance to rebut that.
Our childcare policy cost is $5.4 billion over the forward estimates, which is less than the $5.5 billion. Less than the $5.5 billion that you spent on submarines that just ended up with a torn-up contract. The waste that you have done.
You don't support the submarine contract.
This is the most... You don't either. You tore it up with the French.
No, the one we're doing with the Americans or the British.
We do support that, and you know that.
Well... All right, doesn't sound like it.
Mr Morrison,
it's the French contract you tore up.
Yes,
it cost
and
taxpayers
we were right to do that.
$5.5 billion and produced nothing. This is the most wasteful government in Australia's history. Waste and rorts is something that has characterised this government because it treats taxpayers' money like it's Liberal Party money.
We will get on to that, but we've got to move on. Character. Our next question. Mr Morrison, you've called Mr Albanese the most dangerous Labor leader since Gough Whitlam, and that might be unkind to Gough Whitlam. Can you justify that, please?
Well, we saw it yesterday, and we saw it again today. This is a Labor leader who comes from the far left of the party and has been very loose. He's a loose unit when it comes to the economy. He makes things up as he goes along. The policies he comes up with, he doesn't think through. He's got a housing policy where if you get a wage rise, you've got to sell your house. He's got a health policy that he hasn't been able to cost. He says it's costed, but it's uncosted. He's got an NDIS policy that he isn't able to explain. Now, we've seen over the course of this election campaign, one of the most fundamental things you need to know about as a Prime Minister is unemployment. He couldn't even tell you what the unemployment rate was, let alone the cash rate. Understanding the economy, particularly at a time like this, you can't risk it with someone who just simply has not had the experience in the serious financial jobs of government. No Labor leader in the past, when he's been in the shadow ministry or the ministry, has ever trusted him with a financial job. I wouldn't let him near the till either.
OK, I'll give you a minute to rebut that, Mr Albanese.
Well, I will lead the most experienced incoming Labor government in our history. I've served as Deputy Prime Minister, I've served as a Senior Minister, Infrastructure Minister, Communications, Regional Development across a range of portfolios for 6 years, and been Government Leader in the House of Representatives, where I presided over the entire parliamentary program during that period. I make this point as well. I have acted as Prime Minister on a couple of short occasions. When Bob Hawke, Kevin Rudd and Gough Whitlam became Labor Prime Ministers, none of them had served as ministers in a government. I have. I have an experienced team. We are ready for government. And all we see from this government that is now seeking a fourth term in office. They don't have an agenda for today, let alone an agenda for the next term. All they have is abuse and scare campaigns and fear campaigns, no policies for the future. We can do better than that.
All right, Mr Albanese, you accuse the Prime Minister of not turning up, not taking responsibility, always blaming someone else. Can you justify that, please?
This Prime Minister has that as a characteristic. We saw it with the bushfires, where he rejected the idea that there was any connection with climate change of these events, where he didn't turn up, and when he did turn up, he turned up with an ad with a donate to Liberal Party button in the corner during that bushfire crisis. We saw similarly with the floods, a failure to act early enough and then partisan decisions based upon where support would go. We saw it, importantly, with the failure to order vaccines early enough. Just like he said it wasn't, he didn't hold a hose in the bushfires, in the pandemic. He said that it wasn't a race to get vaccines. It was. It was. It was a critical race for Australia, and as a result, the health and economic impacts were worse. And the same thing happened with the ordering of rapid antigen tests that simply weren't available. And whenever this Prime Minister is confronted with any challenges, he blames the states, blames someone else consistently.
OK, that's a minute. And so, Prime Minister, I'll give you a minute to rebut those allegations.
Well, for the past 3 years, Mr Albanese's been an armchair critic. He's like that person on Monday morning who always says what should have happened on the weekend. And you know what? You never let that person run the team. He's always wise in hindsight. He's always got criticisms to make. And that's been his job for the last 3 years. So why is it we're 10 days out and we still don't know what his economic plan is? We still don't know how he would run the economy. He still didn't know 3 weeks ago what the unemployment rate was, let alone what the cash rate was. And so what we're dealing with here is a leader of the Labor Party who's great on criticism, he's great at pointing at problems, but he doesn't have solutions for them, and even more importantly, he doesn't know how to pay for them. Because in government, you've got to know how to do this stuff. In government, you've got to know how the economy works. You've got to have the strength to make those decisions, and yeah, you don't get them all right. And I don't say that I ever have got them all right, but what I can say is we've come out of this pandemic with 400,000 more people in work than we had before the pandemic, one of the lowest death rates in the world and one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, and we achieved that offer of vaccines within about 2 weeks of our immediate target.
All right, Prime Minister. OK, that's your minute. Mr Morrison, you've said if Mr Albanese is elected, the boat people will come again. The boats will come again. Justify that.
In August of 2008, the Rudd government abolished temporary protection visas. That was one of the key planks of the border protection regime that the Howard government had in place. That was the mark at which the boats started. Now, we all know what happened after that. 800 boats, 1,200 people dead, 50,000 people turning up, causing chaos. Now, we've fixed that with 3 clear policies. Turn the boats back where it's safe to do so, offshore processing and temporary protection visas. Mr Albanese has said that if he's elected, he will abolish temporary protection visas. That means permanent visas for people who have come on a boat. They have learnt nothing in the last decade. I know how to keep them stopped because I know how to stop them. I know what the policy is because I designed it and I made sure it worked. Mr Albanese wants to weaken it. OK,
Mr Morrison. So, Mr Albanese?
The key to keeping our borders strong are the elements of the plan that would turn back boats, which we support, offshore processing, which we support, and settlement in third countries, which we support. Anyone who comes by boat will not get any visa here in Australia. They won't be allowed to settle here in Australia. We have the same position on all of those issues. What this government did say consistently just before the election was that if people were removed from the hotels that they were in Melbourne, then that would lead to chaos and the borders all being reopened again. They said if we did the deal with New Zealand that's been on the table for such a long period of time, then that would have the same result. The truth is that they changed their position just before the election on those issues. The truth is that where we see a good idea, we will support it. And that stands in stark contrast with this government and its approach. The previous answer where Scott spoke about the JobKeeper program, we were arguing for wage subsidies and the Prime Minister said that it was a dangerous idea at that point in time.
OK, we're not going back there. Prime Minister, the difference in the policies, as I see between you two gentlemen, is that the Labor Party wants to get rid of temporary protection visas. What effect will that have?
If you change the visa status of those who have come to Australia by boat, and there are many here right now, that sends a clear message. I know that because I had to experience dealing with that problem. When Mr Albanese, for the brief time he was on the National Security Committee, was there, they said they would not turn boats back. And they attacked the government. They attacked me. They said we shouldn't do it. And all I can say to Australians is this: do you trust the people who have always believed in it, or do you trust someone who was for it and against it, for it and against it? Mr Albanese has been a complete weather vane on border protection. He was vehemently opposed to it. He said he couldn't ask someone to do something that he couldn't do himself. And so I just don't believe he's got the stomach for it if he would have become Prime Minister.
You know what we need in this country, Mark? We need leadership that is prepared to accept a good idea and accept something that is working when it clearly is. And the truth is that boat turnbacks have worked. I've said we support it. We clearly are sending that message. None of those policies will change under a Labor government.
Mark, can I make one more point on that?
Sure.
Because when you do this, and Mr Albanese wouldn't know this because he hasn't done it, he doesn't know all the circumstances you're faced with when you're implementing this policy. And so he can't speak with any great knowledge about what he'd be confronted with, or the many members of his National Security Committee. Tanya Plibersek could be on there, any number of others. What I know is my team know how to do it, have done it, we know what to expect, and we know how to deal with it.
All right, I'll give it to Mr Albanese. I'll make this one observation, though, Prime Minister. No one knows how to do something before they get in the position of power to do it, correct?
Well,
you didn't have any responsibility for immigration before you got into the role, Mr Albanese.
Well, that's just an argument for no change, which is consistent with what this election is about. Consistent with the government that is saying, just give us 3 more years of the same. 3 more years of the same cost of living pressures, 3 more years of not acting on climate change, 3 more years of the same viewing of everything through a political frame rather than through the national interest frame. I believe Australia can do better. I believe we must do better.
Yeah. OK. Another question. Almost 30% of voters say they'll support independents or minor parties in this election, a record high. What have you done to drive voters away from the major parties, Mr Albanese?
There's a great deal of disillusionment out there with the major parties. One of the things that occurred was the revolving door of leadership had an impact on both sides and led to disillusionment. But also the level of corrupt practices that we've seen in recent times has led to that as well. That's one of the reasons why we need a strong National Anti-Corruption Commission. We need to restore faith in politics. I think overwhelmingly the people who are putting themselves forward at this election, regardless of what party or independence they're from, do it for all the right reasons. But the truth is there's a lack of faith out there when people see a block of land that was worth $3 million that $30 million was paying for. When people see North Sydney Pool that was paid for out of a regional fund. They see sports rights, commuter car parks where there's no train stations, for goodness sake, and then the program's cancelled. We need to do better than that. We need to restore faith in politics.
All right, we will get to those issues too. So, Prime Minister, the independents are threatening your members in several seats, including your Treasurer. What's gone wrong?
The last 3 years, last 2 years in particular, have been incredibly tough. And I think that has greatly disrupted our society and our community. And I think people are still feeling the effects of that. And we all wish it wasn't like it has been. when it comes to the many challenges we've had to face, but they have come from well outside our country. And as a result, I think politics has been affected by all of that. But one thing doesn't change as we go into this election. And whether you're in those seats where there are many independents running or you're not, the question still remains the same, because the challenges that we face are very real. And who can best run that economy, who best understands that economy, that is what will impact on your life and the ambitions you have for you and your family. And so I say to those who are thinking about independence, Australia doesn't need a weak government. It doesn't need a weak government that has to negotiate for its existence every single day. It needs a strong government like we have been over the last 3 years, where we could make the strong decisions to get Australia through this difficult time. A vote for the independents may be well-meaning, but it'd be a vote to weaken our parliament and weaken Australia.
OK, so, Mr Albanese, you raised the point of integrity. Let's go to a couple of issues here. Mr Morrison, don't taxpayers have a right to know why they've paid $500,000 compensation to your Education Minister, Alan Tudge's press secretary and former lover, if he apparently did nothing wrong? Haven't taxpayers got a right to know why they've paid $500,000 in this?
Well, first of all, this matter, I'm advised, has not even been settled. And that's because these are matters that go to very private interactions between people, and they are handled sensitively. Well, we had an independent inquiry into Alan Tudge's...
Well, no, but what do you think, though, your Prime Minister, what do you think, though, about your minister in this circumstance? Did he do nothing wrong?
Well, that's why I held an independent inquiry into his conduct and his behaviour.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but you don't need an independent inquiry to say there's a power imbalance in that relationship, do you? Well,
I understand those points, but that's why it's such a serious issue and it should have been investigated. When I was confronted with issues of allegations of behaviour against my members, I called an independent inquiry. When Mr Albanese was confronted by the bullying of the late Senator Hitching, he chose to do nothing. Yeah. Now, I had the inquiry. We got the findings from an esteemed retired public servant who looked at this issue and found that there was nothing to base any finding against Mr Tudge.
And you're happy with that? Well, there was nothing wrong with that? So as Prime Minister, you're happy with that?
Of course. People who have relationships in the office, that's not something I've never approved of. Okay. And we have a strong ministerial code of conduct which has been put in place subsequent to those events, which was done by my predecessor, which I support. Okay. And so I had an independent inquiry. We dealt with the issue. And on the other matter of the financial settlement, well, I'm advised that the matter hasn't even been settled.
All right, Mr Albanese, your view on this, should taxpayers know why they're paying this money?
Well, I think that we need some transparency here, and I note that the person involved here has said that she is happy for there to be public disclosure. I don't know any of the facts of the matter, so I can't comment any further. But I do think that it's quite extraordinary that we're in an election campaign. Alan Tudge is, I think, still the Education Minister. It's not clear to me, Prime Minister, is...
Well, Stuart Robert is the acting Education Minister.
But who's the Education Minister?
Mr Tudge has stood aside from that role for personal reasons. Like, as you'd be aware, ministers, as do shadow ministers, stand aside from their responsibilities.
Sure, so he's not a
but
minister.
He's not a minister. Well, he still has a warrant as a minister. He has not resigned as a minister.
A minister without
nor
portfolio.
has he been dismissed. Yeah, that's a fair way to describe it.
So, I mean, I just think the idea that we don't know who the Education Minister... Alan Tudge...
It will be Alan Tudge.
It will be Alan Tudge.
Alan has advised that
the election,
he would be happy to come back and serve in the ministry, and I welcome that.
Okay. Well, people have been looking for him during this campaign. He hasn't been seen.
Can I ask, gentlemen, Mr Albanese, what action would you take as Prime Minister if this was one of your ministers?
I would make sure, one, that there was transparency. I think quite clearly some of the details of this are of a personal nature. Yeah. I think that is, we need to separate personal behaviour from political behaviour, but we also need to recognise inappropriate behaviour as well. I do think that there are better guidelines have been put in place.
That's a very good point. Do you then recognise wrong behaviour in your own party? Now, let's go to the case of Senator Kimberley Kitching. Yeah. You've said that there are processes there within the Labor Party to deal with these matters. Yes. If a member of your caucus were to now register a formal complaint about the treatment of the former Senator Kimberley Kitching, would you investigate?
Well, that would be dealt with through the independent processes.
Would that spark an investigation through those processes?
Yes, it would.
So
Yes,
one member complains, there would be an investigation.
Yes, it would. That's the structure that we have in place. That's the structure that was established in 2018 by Bill Shorten and then strengthened with the involvement of the entire caucus, led by Sharon Clayton, the chair of our caucus, and which people participated in.
And so we can assume no one has done that
Correct.
at this point. Mr Morrison?
Well, I find it amazing. In my case, there was a press conference held by Ms Miller. I didn't wait for anybody to write to me or do anything like that. We moved and established an independent inquiry to get to the bottom of it. I thought that was the most important thing, to establish confidence regarding the ministerial standards. They were upheld, and I acted swiftly. I find it disappointing that the serious allegations that were made about the bullying of the late Senator Kitching.
What would you have done, Prime Minister, if it was in your party?
Well, I've just told you what I would have done. Yeah. I've just done it. When I was presented with a sensitive issue like that, I called an independent inquiry.
OK, we need to get the bottom
Miller
of it.
didn't give evidence.
Well, she chose not to participate.
She chose not to participate. So, gentlemen...
That's her right.
Gentlemen,
I respect
isn't
that.
the point here, all this, isn't the point here that we need an independent integrity commission to deal with these matters, to take them out of the hands of politicians?
Well, I agree. That's why I have 347 pages of legislation
no bill
to establish
but no bill in the Parliament. You didn't put a bill to the Parliament.
I agree with that. But I'm one step ahead of the Labor Party, who've been talking about this for 3 years.
But this is the opposition. And government, when will you bring your bill for an integrity commission before the Parliament?
This year, Mark.
And when will you bring your bill for an integrity commission before the Parliament?
If we can ensure that our bill can be passed, then I'm very happy to bring it forward.
But Mark,
that has always been my case.
Is an argument.
Let me talk about the bill that I have, because the bill has powers of search, it has powers compelling witnesses, it has
Prime Minister,
powers
we do
of
know
royal
the detail, and it's on your website.
No,
we do know it. I know it is important.
And it's funded.
And no, I don't want to be harsh here, but we do know that, and there's been a long debate about it. The crucial point, though, is at what point does the Parliament get to decide on this issue? Isn't politics the art of the achievable?
I agree with that,
you
Mark.
hear arguments from both sides, and you come to a consensus in the middle somewhere, and you have an agreement.
Well, I hope we can do that, Mark, but a body of this nature is important, and you've got to get the design right. And it can't be driven by the whims of politics. It needs to be developed by good design where the rule of law applies. It applies to criminal conduct. And we don't see a situation where we have agencies that can go and convict people before they've even heard the case in the media. That is not a good way to run a country. That is not a good way to uphold integrity. I think it only undermines the process.
All right, Mr Albanese, I'll get you a chance.
We do need to clean up politics, and we need a national anti-corruption commission, and one with teeth. Under the model put forward by Mr Morrison, what it would be ministers would decide, have a decision to make whether something was referred to an anti-corruption commission. It needs to be independent of politics. That's the whole point of an independent national anti-corruption commission. And the idea that somehow the opposition's responsible for the government not even introducing legislation, that taken to its logical conclusion, why would you vote for Scott Morrison on Saturday week? Because what he says is, unless the opposition support legislation, it won't even come before the Parliament.
OK, so Scott Morrison will get
knows how to manage an economy, and he's not loose with economics.
You'll both get a chance to put your pitches to the people on why they should vote for you at the end of the program. Thank you so much for the engagement. It's interesting and it's reasonably polite. So thank you for that. We'll just take a breather now, but after the break, the question that could stump them both, and key questions from the West, as our undecided voters around the country prepare to decide who won the final showdown, live across the 7 network. Welcome back to the final showdown. WA has crucial seats that could decide who becomes Prime Minister. Let's welcome the West Australian's federal political editor, Lani Scarr, for the next questions. Lani.
Elections are about the future. People watching tonight want to know who is giving us a better future. Right now, children face incredible levels of debt that the government won't pay off for decades to come. WA is the only state that's posted a surplus over the past year, driven by mining, mostly through the pandemic. To pay off debt, will you both categorically rule out a carbon or mining tax to reduce that debt burden?
Prime Minister.
Never have, never will have a mining or a carbon tax. Under our government, our taxes will always be lower because right now, if you're earning $90,000 at home there today, you are paying $50 a week less in tax every single week because of the tax cuts we've already legislated and delivered. And there's more to follow in the next term, where between $45,000 and $200,000, you will pay no more than 30 cents in the dollar. We are the party of lower taxes. We've always delivered lower taxes. And one of the reasons WA was able to achieve that surplus was the GST deal, that we're able to ensure that WA got their fair share of the GST. As Treasurer and as Prime Minister, I fought for it, I delivered it, and Western Australia has got the benefit of that, their fair share, because it was in the national interest.
Mr Albanese?
The answer to your questions is yes, we will certainly rule them out and have done so. But when it talks about Western Australia and the success of Western Australia, one of the things that I'll be doing is working with Mark McGowan. Scott Morrison, when he had a choice between Mark McGowan and Clive Palmer, he chose Clive Palmer. He went to court as part of with the Solicitor General, spent taxpayers' money backing up Clive Palmer's legal case to open up WA's borders. Now, WA has been successful under Mark McGowan because they've made tough decisions, which has helped to boost not just the WA economy, but our entire national economy.
Mr Albanese, most economists do believe pricing carbon is the most effective way to reduce emissions. You are going to this election with a strong mandate on climate change. If you're saying no carbon tax or no price on carbon, how are you going to achieve net zero by 2050?
Well, we've got a better system. What we have is we're using the Abbott government system that it created, the safeguard mechanism, but also what we have is a plan to fix transmission. What that's about is making sure that renewables can plug into the grid. At the moment, that's one of the weaknesses. That will stabilise the grid. We also have a plan for electric vehicles. At the last campaign, Scott Morrison said that electric vehicles would end the weekend. We want to encourage the take-up by reducing taxes on electric vehicles is what we will do.
And Mr Morrison, you also want to achieve, you said you're going to achieve net zero by 2050. How are you going to do that, and why are most economists wrong if they say a price on carbon is the right way to go?
We're investing $22 billion to develop the technology that Australia and in fact the world needs to address the challenge of climate change. Our plan is about technology, not taxes. It's about not mandates, but giving people choices about how to achieve this and to have reliable, affordable energy in our system to ensure that we can make the transition over a long period of time. Anthony talks about the safeguard mechanism, which he says he's borrowing from us. What he's doing is lowering the threshold, which means a carbon credit scheme which will put additional prices on mines, on oil, on gas, on petroleum, on transport and cement production. That's what he won't tell you. He also won't tell you by investing $20 billion in the transmission network, which adds another $50 billion from the private sector, that has to be recovered from you, the electricity consumer, and that will put up electricity prices by $560 a year.
Prime Minister, you've called that a sneaky carbon tax, a carbon tax by stealth. Is that really the truth, though?
Yeah,
and
it is.
Mr Albanese, how do you respond to that?
Well, Lani, there he goes again. He says that he supports net zero by 2050 and then comes up with all the reasons why nothing should happen. The truth is, this government have had 22 different energy policies and haven't landed one of them. And business is so far ahead of the government with its strategies. That's why our policy will end the climate wars. It's been supported by the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Industry Group, by the National Farmers Federation, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the ACTU. We need to move on from this debate. Climate change is real and it's here now. We see it with the bushfires, we see it with the floods. We need to make sure that we actually harness the energy that business has for this change to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities which are there. Australia can be a renewable energy superpower for the world if we seize this opportunity.
Can I give you an example? Down in Gilmore, in the electorate of Gilmore, in Narra, Manildra, we have provided an $85 million loan through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to ensure that they can transform how they do their production of their important ethanol production there, which supports so many jobs. That's how you do it. You invest in the businesses to make the change. You don't tax them more with a carbon credit scheme which taxes their operations.
Mr Albanese, you were at Manildra
the point is
a couple of weeks ago.
Scott, exactly. I visited Manildra a number of times and I was there during this campaign. And the truth is, what they are doing is taking the opportunity that's there to lower their emissions because it lowers prices. That is what is driving the change through. That's why, for example, renewables are the cheapest form of new energy. That is a fact. And the new opportunities which are there, which are driving through. But Scott spoke about the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. That was created by the Labor government, of which I was a minister, and this government tried to abolish it.
We kept it, and it's It's funding Manildra to reduce their emissions in a regional area which is saving jobs and enable them to produce into the future.
OK, gentlemen, we get you disagree on that. Lani, let's move to the next question.
We do have another very important question on women. Women are getting a stronger voice, particularly in this election campaign. Looking forward, they want certainty, security and equality, especially in the workplace. Free childcare happened during the pandemic. You've both spoken about it tonight. Why can't free childcare continue? Mr Albanese first. What
we want to do is we have a plan for more affordable childcare where 96% of families will be better off and 4% will be the same. We've also said that what we will do is to have the Productivity Commission in our first term look towards whether you would move to a universal system of affordable childcare. What are the economic implications of that? Why do we do cheaper childcare? It's not welfare, it's economic reform. It will boost productivity, it will help business, it will also help women's retirement incomes, but that's just one element that we have. We also want to make gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act. We want to make sure that we deliver on safe workplaces as well, which is why we'll adopt all 55 recommendations of the Jenkins Review into safety in the workplace, including the obligations on employers to do what they can to make every workplace safe. OK,
that's your minute.
Mr Morrison.
Well, thank you. I mean, when you look at the results, this is an incredibly important issue. The gender pay gap has fallen from 17.4% under Labor to 13.8% where it is now, and it even went down to 13.4%. What does that mean? It means women today, because of the closing of the gender pay gap under our government, are $70 a week better off. There's 1.1 million more women in work since we came to government. Female participation in the workforce has been at record levels as a result of the strong economic policies that has been providing opportunities for women to get into the workforce. And we've been championing women's entrepreneurship. And we've been championing women in non-traditional trades and skills. So many more women taking up jobs in the Western Australian mining industry, but also up in Queensland. I've met them down at Snowy Hydro. I've met them in the manufacturing industries. I've met them taking up these jobs and getting them the skills. We've got $3.8 billion invested in the skills of our country, providing record numbers of apprenticeships right now, and women are taking up more and more of those jobs.
Mr Morrison, it has been reported that an MP in your party room suggested that childcare and women accessing childcare was outsourcing parenting. Do you agree? And is this an issue you ever talked to Jenny about?
No, it's not something I agree with. And we talk about childcare and many issues all the time. Our children themselves obviously went through childcare, and we went through that with other parents and their families. We have a responsible and affordable policy on childcare. What we don't do is go and promise the world when you know you can't pay for it. If you go to 90% childcare for everybody, that is a policy that all Australians are going to have to pay for. What we've demonstrated is we've been getting women into work because they want to work and they want those opportunities, and a strong economy is what provides for it. It's fine to make big promises, but you've got to be able to pay for them. And when you can pay for them, fair enough. But we haven't seen one policy costed by the Labor opposition during this campaign.
You've made that point several times.
Mr Albanese, you have said that you want a Productivity Commission review into this issue. There's already been a Productivity Commission review into this issue. Why do we need another one?
Because you need to, when we move to more affordable childcare, they'll be able to see what's happening in practice as well, what the implications are. Where Scott, I think, is wrong on this issue is to see it as just a cost. What it is an investment. It's an investment in women, it's an investment in families, it's an investment in our economy, because it will grow. All of the analysis shows that every time you spend $1 on childcare, more than $2 comes back through economic growth, through increased workforce participation, through increased productivity. Australia has fallen to 70th in the world for women's economic participation and opportunity. We can do better than that. We can do so much better than that. We do very well on education for women, but that isn't translating into those full-time permanent career jobs and those career paths. And it's also having a significant income whereby women are whereby women are retiring with up to 40% or more less retirement incomes than men.
So if it's so important, will you commit to free childcare then? Why can't it be brought into line with the school system?
Because what we're doing is putting forward very clear costed policies. Our policy is costed on childcare. It is $5.4 billion across the forward estimates. It's an investment. It is less than the waste that has gone on in this government,
all right,
far less.
We have to move on, Lani. Thank you very much. We'll see you shortly again with Michael Usher, who will reveal the debate winner according to our voters in pubs within marginal seats around the country. We're going to hear your closing statements in a moment, gentlemen. This is where we want a positive answer. We've heard lots of negatives, and we get that you don't like each other. However, surely everybody has one redeeming feature, don't they? What is the one strength, Mr Prime Minister, that you find in this gentleman that you admire but also worries you?
Well, the thing about Anthony that I've always admired is that he's never forgot where he's come from. And he grew up in Housing Commission, and I have no doubt that the other day on Mother's Day is always probably the toughest day of each year that is for him. And he's shown the ability to rise to be the leader of one of the oldest parties in this country, and he should be commended for that. He's shown a great deal of determination over that period of time to rise from very humble beginnings. And I admire that in Australians, and I admire that in Anthony, and that's great. But, you know, to do this job, you need to know your stuff. You need to be across the detail. You need to not make things up on the rung, and you can't be loose on the economy, because too many Australians' livelihoods depend on it. And as much as I respect what he's been able to achieve, I just don't believe that he's been able to demonstrate that he's able to get across the detail to do this job.
Yeah, that's what we call a compliment sandwich.
He was trying. He was trying there.
He gave it a bit of a crack, I'd say. But now you.
He was trying there.
Yep.
Well, the job of Prime Minister is one that is obviously a difficult one to do. Scott's absolutely committed to his nation, and I admire that. And on a range of issues, to name one, mental health. In terms of young people, we've seen increased funding for mental health, but in particular, increased funding for Headspace and for those issues. Mental health is something that, when we were all a bit younger, just wasn't spoken about. It's a good thing that it's being spoken about. It's a good thing that the Prime Minister speaks about it as well.
There you go. You can be positive, and you can like each other.
No, I had no barbs.
I wanted one of each when you asked me. I must have misunderstood the question.
Oh, thank you for that. Let's move to the final statements. We'll start with you, Mr Morrison.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone, for joining us here this evening for this debate, and thank you, Mark and Anthony. There are great opportunities ahead, Australia, and I'm really excited about them. Over the last couple of years, we've come through the most difficult times that we could have ever imagined and couldn't have contemplated 3 years ago. But here we are. We've stuck together. As a government, we've backed you in. And this is one of the big differences, I think, in what we've heard tonight. See, in the Liberals and Nationals, we believe in you. We want to back you in. We believe a strong economy is based on you. We don't believe the government is the answer. We believe you are the answer. And that's what our policies are designed to do. That's why we believe a strong economy is the best way to enable you to fulfil your aspirations for you and your family, to shield you against the pressures that are going to come in the years ahead on our economy, putting upward pressure on interest rates and the cost of living, to shield that job, to shield that income and that business and that retirement saving that you have. It's also going to guarantee those essential services so we can tackle the big problems in aged care. $19.1 billion to support our response to the Aged Care Royal Commission that I called. These are tough challenges. Continuing to support Medicare at record levels, bulk billing at 88.8%. It's up from 82.2% when we first came to government. To ensure we keep building those roads and infrastructure that keep you safer and get you home safe and on time to be with your family or to get to work, and to ensure that we continue to invest in our defence forces as we go forward in our security and intelligence agencies. This election is a choice. It's a choice about who can manage and deliver that strong economy, because that's what your future depends on. And now is not a time to risk that on an unproven opposition and Labor leader who don't have a plan for our economy and haven't got the experience with the challenges that we face. A vote for the Liberals and Nationals on May 21 is the strong, responsible and safe choice for a strong economy, for a stronger future.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. Mr Albanese, your closing statement.
I have a plan for a better future, a plan to make sure we can grow the economy in a sustainable way by investing in infrastructure, by investing in climate policy, by making sure that no one is left behind and no one is held back. We can do better. We have a range of challenges facing us as a nation. We have childcare costs that are spiralling, that stop women working that fourth or fifth day. We can do better than that. We've had 22 attempts at climate policy and we have issues of floods and bushfires. We've seen the impact. We can do better than just continuing to drift there. We have pressure where so many people can't see a doctor when they need one. We can do better than that. We have young Australians who can't get the skills and training that they need for the jobs of the future, and we can do better than that. This election is a choice. It's a choice over whether we seize the opportunities which are before us. We have a government that's asking for 3 more years of more of the same. They don't really have a plan or a policy for the future because they struggle with the present. And that's why at this election we've got constructive plans and processes in place that we're putting forward to the Australian people. If we don't elect a new government, we'll miss out on the opportunity to increase women's economic participation through cheaper childcare. We'll miss out on the opportunity to end the climate wars. We'll miss out on the opportunity to deal with cost of living and stop everything going up except for people's wages. If we can't even get consensus here about a $1 increase for the minimum wage, then I think that this country isn't able to go forward. I firmly believe that we have a great future, but in order to do that, we need a better government.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for a spirited and very civil exchange, which I hope helped our viewers make their decision which way they'll vote on May 21. And thank you too for your commitment to the country, both of you, and what you do. It's a big sacrifice. We need someone to lead the country on May 21, the best to both of you.
Thank you, Mark, and to Seven for hosting.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Seven.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone, for